Hello, and welcome to Towle Talks. Today, we talk about sessions and coding. So for review, please make sure the models are working correctly, and before continuing, we need the models up that we did last lecture before we continue with this lecture. Now, if you remember right, we talked about sessions when we did normal PHP. However, CodingNighter is going to do their own version of sessions. So remember, sessions are what happens for persistent data between website clicks. If we didn't have sessions, it'd be very difficult because every time we click something, our configuration or our information would just disappear and we'd have to start from scratch the next time we click the link. So sessions keep persistent data and make the web application feel like an actual software that you might have installed on your computer. There are other ways of doing this, so I'm not saying sessions are exclusive. We could try to do something with cookies. You could try to do something with MySQL database. You could even try to do something with flat files on the server. But the sessions are probably the easiest way to store data persistently between interactions. So we're going to talk about how to start the CodingNighter session, and we're going to talk about how to use the CodingNighter session. So today we're going to start using this session. We're talking about starting using the sessions in PHP or in CodingNighter. CodingNighter is going to use their own version of sessions and not the built-in PHP sessions. And just as a quick review, we need to have persistent information in between web clicks. So if I click on a link, I don't want all my information to go away. I want to keep it when I click on another link. And one of the first things we have to know is whether or not the user is logged in. So we're going to talk about that. And in order to do this, we're going to use sessions. Hello. So today we're going to start stitching the program together. Now I have a couple tabs here. There's going to be a lot of little files we're going to make today. So again, pause the video if you need to. Here, before we start off with anything, ignore this for a moment, we're going to open up our config file. And if you don't remember where that is, hit open. And it's going to be under our application folder, the application folder, and then a config folder. And we're going to go to config.php. So the first thing we need to think about when we start, we have the models done now, or at least done enough. We're going to modify one model a little bit, but not a big deal. So one thing we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to figure out whether or not the user's logged in. And it's really be annoying if every time you wanted to use a web application, the user had to re-log in. We don't want that. So we're going to use sessions. Now, I'll warn you, well, not warn you, but just inform you, I guess, that sessions are handled by CodingNighter differently than they are by raw PHP. So we talked about raw PHP sessions earlier in the semester. This is going to be CodingNighter's own version, our own take on the session. So here, they've actually revamped this several times, so this is even different than the original 3.0 CodingNighter. But now they give you several different ways. Now we're going to keep the simple, basic default way. You can make this database and have your sessions based off the database, which is a popular new trend because you can decide whether or not you want some of these session variables to go away. And that way, when the user logs back in, it looks like everything's the same. So that's not a bad idea. But just for simplicity's sake, we're going to just keep it very simple. All of this, if you go down and look for your session inside your config, it's about, let's say 3/4 of the way down, maybe 2/3. And then here you'll see this config array with ses driver, ses cookie name, ses expiration, save path, match IP, etc., etc., etc. So we're going to talk about this real quickly. The cookie name, I believe, is just used as an identifier for the client to tell the server how I have this session. I don't believe it's actually stored in a cookie. I could be wrong there, but I don't believe it's stored in a cookie. The file says how you're going to store the session data. In this case, we're going to store it in the file. I believe yours default is 7200. I changed mine to 3600. This is the number of seconds before the session disappears. I think an hour is fine. We don't need to worry about save paths. We're going to make this null. And then match IP means every time I log in, I have to match the IP. Otherwise, my session is considered invalid. To be honest, this is probably not a bad thing to set to true. Because the chances, except for the fact in the odd case that you log in, then you get on a bus and go to Starbucks and log back and try to get back on your site. In that situation, this would be triggered as the IPs would be different. Therefore, this would be false. Your session would be destroyed. But most of the time when you use a web application, you're going to be one spot. So this actually wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing to set to true. This would just be another level of option, another level of security. Time to update. This will update the session ID. And this is again why it's very difficult to hack sessions, because every 300 seconds I'm going to get a new session ID. And I mean, if I've somehow broken into the old session, well, it's already gone. And this one, when I regenerate the ID, so when this triggers, do I want to destroy all the session data? By default, and most of the time, we're going to want this to be false, just because we don't want this user's data to go away when I update the session ID. On some rare occasions, you want this to be true, and then you have to cross that bridge when we get there. So basically, everything's going to be set up here just pretty much like it's given. We can change this. We can change this 7200 to 3600. So that concludes that part of it. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about just handling the login system. We're not going to do anything else at the moment, but just handling the login system. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to make a new controller. So we go File, New File. I already made this, but as controllers, and I call it Hoot Controller. This application is going to be small enough. I'm probably just going to use one controller. You can have more if you want. So I call it Hoot Controller. What's that? Save that. Now here we're going to do a couple things. We're going to start using the controller the way it was intended, and we're going to start using some views. So again, there's going to be a bunch of little files we have to write here. So we're going to make a class Hoot Controller extend CI controller. Again, pause the video if you need to. Public function underscore construct. Call the parent constructor. We're going to load the URL helper. We're going to load the Hoot user model, the Hoot model, and the Hoot like model. Right now we're only going to be using the Hoot user model though. We're also going to load a library called session. This will initialize and create our session. We don't have to worry about doing that weird session start function call up here. That's handled. Again, this is Coding Nighter's version of session. So now the first thing we have to do is we do have one little problem here. When you load up a website, you're loading the code from scratch. So there's no way to set whether or not the user's logged in and expect that to remain there. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if is set session login. Session login is going to be whether or not we're logged in. If that's false, then go ahead and populate the session data with like a default not logged in state. So username is blank, user ID is blank, and login is false. And then we're going to say this is associative array again. This session set user data $ARR. What's going to happen is now session is going to have a key login that's going to be false. Session is going to have a key username, it's going to be blank, and a key user ID, which is going to be blank. So this is how I set session data right off the bat. And that's in case I have not logged in. Otherwise, I have to do this check down here, and every time I check to see whether or not I'm logged in, I have to see whether or not this is even set. So we go down to our function index. There are three ways to access the data. You can do what looks like the classic way. It's not the normal PHP session, but you can do what looks like the normal PHP session, underscore session, and then the key. You can do this session and then the key, or you can do this session user data and send in a key. This is the old school from Coding Nighter 2, so it's a little more verbose, but this is probably the easiest way to do it. So when we load up the index, this is going to be the first function that gets called. We want to see whether or not the user's logged in. So we're going to say if session login, and remember, we don't have to worry about if this is checked or not because we do that up here on a constructor. And if it has not been set, we set it to false. So session and then login, how did I get login? Because I passed this array in here, and login is equal to false. So now session key login is going to be false, if this is what happened. So this is false. I jump down here and I load up 4 views. I load up a head view, a nav view, a logger view, and then a template footer view. If it's true, I load up the head, nav, and then I create an associative array with the value user and set it to the session username. And I pass that into a view called main, and I pass it in as a data. Remember, when I pass an associative array into a view, this key is going to become a variable. We'll talk about a little bit more about that. And then I call the foot. So pretty simple there. Now I'm going to get into these little files in a moment, but this is the idea of what we're going to be doing. Remember my templates, I have a subdirectory for my head, nav, and foot, and my main views are just underneath the view file. Now I need 2 more. So remember, every time I submit to this web application, I'm going to be going through the controller. So I need 2 more functions. I'm going to have log me in. This is what the result from when I'm ready to log in. I will call this, and I'm going to have log out. So here I'm going to take this out. This is a debug statement, so we just ignore that. Sorry. We have public log me in. I'm going to say local variable equals post u. Where am I getting this u from? I'll show you when I get to the form. Local variable p equals post p. Again, I will show you where I get this p from. Then I'm going to say I'm going to call a new function we haven't created yet in the Hoot user model. This is going to be ID is equal to this Hoot user model authenticate and pass in the username and password. I'll explain what we're going to do here in a moment. Now, if this ID is false, that means I've failed to log in, and I really should have a failed screen or an error screen here. And then I'm going to call this index. If it works, I'm going to set the session data with the, say, login is true. The username is $u, and the user ID is whatever this function returns as ID. And then I'm going to set the user data with that data, and then I'll call index, and then that's how this part here will be true. And if I log out, when I call a controller and I want to log out, then I'm going to say this session says destroy. This will destroy my session. However, I noticed that I'm calling index right after this, so there's a little bit of a race condition. So what I did is after I destroyed the session, I just set session set user data login to false. It doesn't destroy the session immediately, so I just set the login to false here, and then it'll destroy the session shortly after index is called. So that's going to be my logout function. Now, where to begin? Okay, so let's go talk about the Hoot user or the Hoot user model real quick since we modified it. Excuse me. So remember, I said that I haven't added everything to models, and I wanted to show you that you can add to the model fairly easily. So we want to have a function. Here's an idea of adding a function to a model. I want to be able to pass in a username and a password, and one, see if that's the right password, see if it authenticates, and two, I want to be able to get the either whether or not it authenticated or the ID for that particular user. because you'll see that we'll need the user ID more than we'll need the username. Now, I could set up two different functions. I could have authenticate return true or false and then get user ID. But I could also do it in one. So I can go authenticate user and password, and jump over here, public function authenticate username and password, and then I'm going to query. This one's fairly similar to what we're used to, but a little bit trickier, so pay attention. Query equals this DB get where from the users table, and then we have the associative array for the condition. User equals $U. I think we had this one before. And then password is going to have to equal the MD5 of the plain text password. Remember, we stored everything as an MD5, so if we just said password it has to equal $P, it would not work. We have to say MD5 $P. And then we're going to close off our getWhere and send that to a result array. Now, if the size of the query is greater than 0, then we know that these two conditions matched. If these two conditions matched, we know that the user has authenticated. So if it's greater than 0, what we're going to do is we're going to return the first result, which should only be one result, and then we're going to return the ID. And right now there could be more than one result because we don't have any limits on our usernames or uniques, but we'll get there in a little bit later. So we're going to return to 0, and then the ID, this will return the user's ID. If this is equal or less than 0, which should be equal 0, then we're just going to return false because this password and username and password combination does not exist. So this is going to be our authenticate for our Hoot application. So take a moment, pause the video if you need to, and copy this down. So that's what we're doing here. Now, how do I get over, how do I call these functions? How's this going to work? Well, basically, if I am not logged in, I'm going to load the head, the nav, the logger, and a template's foot. So let me show you under the view file again. So if I go file, save as. So under views, I made templates, and I made foot, head, and nav.php. This is my head.php. You can pause it real quick, copy it down. This, by the way, is where you would link to a style sheet. So if you had a style sheet set up, you could link it here, and then all your web pages that used a head.php as the header would have the same style sheets. Here is nav, which right now just says my Hoot, and then nav and close nav. Nothing special yet. We're going to come back to this one a little bit later, but nothing. This is going to be nav. Again, pause it if you need it. And then foot, this is going to be footer open. This is going to my Hoot, close footer, and close the body and close the HTML. Did I not open it? Hold on, I think I made a mistake here. No, I did. So I opened the body and head. So that's why I closed the body and foot. So those are just the three templates. Now there are two additional views. Inside, I'm calling either logger or main. So if I'm not logged in, I'm going to call logger. I'm going to call it right after the nav, right before the foot. It's going to appear inside the body, and basically it's going to be a form. And the form is going to have an action. This is the script I'm going to call, just like we talked about earlier semester. I'm going to use site URL, so echo site URL. Then I'm going to say Hoot controller / log me in. This is how I'm calling the log me in function. I'm going to use method post. I'm going to say I have a username, input type text, name u, values blank, password input type password, name p, value blank. This is where I get my u and p. So when the user fills out this form and hits submit, it calls this function, and post u is going to username they typed, and post p is the password they typed. So that is where I'm getting the u and p from. So this is basically all I need for the logger.php. So pause it real quick, make that. Now, if we look over here at hoot controller, you'll see that I've called head, nav, I call the logger, then I call templates foot. So that's how we're calling this view logger. If I'm already logged in, I'm going to do templates head, templates nav. I'm going to load this data, this associative array data user equals the username, session username. I'm going to pass this in to this view called main. Remember, when I pass this into the view main, this key becomes a variable. So if I look at my main, I'm going to say open PHP echo welcome $user all capital. Where did I get this variable? This is the key of the associative array I passed in. Then I'm going to have a form. It says action echo site URL hoot controller logout. This is how I'm going to call the logout controller. Then I'm going to say method post, and then I'm going to have one input type. The name is going to be S, but the value is going to be logout. It's basically a submit type, and this is how I'm going to log out. So when I push this button, I will go to log out. It will destroy the session and set my logout session login to false. So pause that real quickly. Make sure you have this one. Now if I go back to my hoot controller, if I'm logged in, this is where I'm calling the main controller. So this is how I'm now kind of stitching it all together. There are several levels that we have to go through here. I'm going to probably have another video where we just set up the Navbar and then set up the basic hoot page, and then I might have you guys work on some of the other stuff on your own. But you can see how the web application is beginning to get scaffolded here, so to speak. We've dug the hole, we've poured the foundation. Now we're kind of setting it up. We haven't worried about the cosmetics yet, but we're getting the frame up. Maybe this might be like one wall of the frame, so to speak, for the metaphor. So now that we have this, let's go open up our web browser, and in here, if I refresh this, just hit log out, or rather hoot controller. So this will immediately call index. Because I am not logged in, it's going to ask me for my username and password. Then we're going to hit submit. Now it says it'll work. It says my hoot, welcome to Beetle, my hoot. Now if I go back to the index, this will still have me logged in, because right now my session variable is set login as to true. So see, nothing's changed. I'm still logged in. When I hit log out, then it takes me back to it'll log me out, destroys the session, sets login to false, calls the index, which then loads up the login form. So that is basically all we've done right now, is we've just set up the login system. Alright, so now that sessions are done, I was actually going to end the video here. I wanted to have one little section where we talk about the Navbar, because it doesn't really fit anywhere else. I figured I'd add it here. We have that little template. Remember, we have the header, we have the nav, then we have whatever our actual page is going to be, then we have the footer. Well, inside that nav, that's where all our links are going to go for our website. Now, at first, that seems like a pretty trivial task, right? Just set up some anchors and anchor tags and just link away. But in a web application, your Navbar is going to be conditional on several things. What your status for whether or not you're logged in, the role or the administrative privileges of your user. Are you an admin? Are you a user? Or even the state of the web application itself. So I wanted to go real quickly and show you how to make in the view how to make a Navbar based on a condition. And obviously the only thing we have right now is login, so we're going to do the login on Navbar. So now that we have the login system, we're going to talk a quick example of the Navbar. Now we have a nav template, and here we want to put all our links to our web application. But creating a Navbar is not as easy as you would first think, because think about the Navbar, the different options on Navbar are going to be based on whether or not they're logged in, based on the user roles, and possibly based on the web application state, like where you are in the application. So your links and stuff you have in your Navbar are actually going to be a lot of times in conditionals. So I'm going to give a quick example of how to make a Navbar that's conditional based on whether or not you're logged in. So one more thing, and this will be pretty quick, I wanted to talk about with our hoot was the NAB panel. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I expect you guys to kind of flush this out on your own. But remember we have this little template, the nav.php. It's under templates nav.php. Well, I've added something here to show you that we can actually use the session inside our views, and we can set up the nav so we can have a different set of buttons whether or not you're logged in. Now this is a simple case. If I'm logged in, so if session login is true, then I'm going to have a link to go to the logout, just like I did for my little button in the form. So I go back to my main. I have the form that calls the controller logout. Well, I can do the same thing by just using a link. So here's how we could do a logout button. Likewise here, I have just a link to go to the home, which will send it to the hoot controller, which will send it to index. Right now, it's going to go to index anyway, but this is in case you're not logged in, and maybe we want to show the top 10 hoots or something, even if you're not logged in, then this will just take you home. So here, if you are logged in, you could have all the different links here, like create hoot, edit hoot, like, etc., whatever you need to do here. And if you're not logged in, you could have your non-authorized functions right down here. Those are two options available to you, and I wanted to mention that this is kind of how we're going to set up the Navbar. Now, obviously, it's just going to be pretty plain right now. It's not going to be very special, but once you put CSS on it with a nav and the anchor tags, then you can make it look pretty neat. So right now, if we look at it, I am not logged in, so I have my home link, which just takes me back to index, which is going to print this. If I log in, now I have my logout, and I could potentially have all my other functions right here in my Navbar. If I hit logout, then I'm logged out. So that's just a quick intro to the Navbar, and hopefully you'll flush that out when we get a little bit farther along with our hoot. So for today, for review, we've learned how about sessions, and we learned a little bit about Navbar creation. For the problem of the day, I want you to create a page that will allow a user with admin privileges to add another user to hoot. On login, you can store the role in the session. I would recommend that, and add a link to the Navbar only if the user is an admin. Also, make sure you have any controller functions have to be surrounded by if the user is an admin, because remember, anyone can access the controller functions just by typing in the URL. So you still have to protect the functions themselves. Thanks for watching. Please make sure you understand sessions and go through the CodeIgniter manual on sessions. Also, I would recommend, we didn't talk about it, we probably won't talk about it in this class, but you might want to look on the CodeIgniter manual on how to create a MySQL-based session. That's another thing that's up and coming. A lot of companies are going with sessions stored on MySQL. Anyway, this has been Towle Talks. Thanks for watching. Until next time, cheers. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something and enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a comment or a like below. And again, thank you.